Good morning and welcome to Max Joe webinar on Sample CutSheet. My name is Larry Mireku and I'm your presenter for today. I am a professional geoscientist and I have diverse experience in mineral exploration and mining operations across multiple jurisdictions and geographic environments. I am exceptionally passionate about data management and also how to generate insights from data. I'll aim to finish my presentation in 20 minutes so that we'll have enough time for questions. The Sample CutSheet application is a very powerful tool that allows a project geologist or designated person to efficiently define sample intervals and QC policies. The resulting data can then be sent to a sampling crew so that they can efficiently complete their job. In order for us to access the Sample CutSheet plugin, we have to ensure that it has been properly installed and configured in the LogChief application. Whether you are installing it as a brand new installation or you are upgrading from a previous version, this is the process that you need to follow. First of all, we need to locate the executable file for the plugin. Launch the executable, and then in the next few seconds, we are going to have the opportunity to be presented with a few tasks to complete. We need to run 3 SQL scripts that will update relevant tables in our MDS and in the LogChief database. It shouldn't take too long, and I will show you how to execute these scripts. Okay, we click on this and you can see there are 3 scripts here. This is the first one. We need to point to our SQL Server instance and then select our MDS. This is my MDS here, and I'm going to run this script and successful. Secondly, we need to run the plugin script on the LogChief database. Let's go in here, look for my LogChief database, and then run it. We're good to go. Secondly, we have to run the scripts to update the system objects in the MDS and also in our LogChief database. So here we're going to grab our MDS, run the script, successful. It's always good to see that message. Then the last one, but not the least, I should say, come back here to the LogChief database, successful. We're doing good. Now the very last one, we need to run this on the LogChief system database. What is the LogChief system database and where is it? When you launch your LogChief application, go into Tools, Options, and then when you click on this, it will tell you here what your LogChief system database is. Mine is version 316. So let's go in here and then look for version 316. There we go. Select OK and you're good to go. Now we have finished running all these preparatory scripts. We're ready to install the CutSheet plugin. Hit install. Yes. Next. Accept. Next. 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 Install. We're all good now. CutSheet's plugin has been installed and ready to rock and roll. We can now exit from here and then let's fire up our LogChief application. Now we can see our LogChief application is now showing us the sample CutSheet plugin. We're ready to rock and roll. Double click, and then let's maximize the window. Now you notice there are a few templates here. Let's use the Maxwell standard sample CutSheet template. Do you want to load this configuration? Yes, we absolutely want to. Now I'd like to draw your attention to a few things here. We need to define the holes that we are going to use for the sampling. We need to define the sample intervals, and then we need to set the QC policy. So let's first go in and select the holes. Select, choose your data set, and then choose the holes you want to define the intervals for. Okay, we're good to go. Now let's go into the samples. Here we're going to define the sampling. What intervals are we going to sample? Let's choose 2. Who is a sampler? Select. What type of samples are we going to be sending to the lab? Half-core samples. And the sample method is a cut-core sample method. And then sample category, the original field samples, and the conditions, they are dry. Then we go into a QC policy. Now you will notice that I have left the sample ID and the sample starting number for just for a moment. We'll come back to it. Now we have to define the QC policy. This is the rate of insertion of duplicates, blanks, and standard samples. We can either do that by choosing a fixed interval or using a frequency. I like to use a frequency. So for duplicates, we want to go maybe 5% insertion rate. That means every 20th sample will select a duplicate. Now the QC category is a field duplicate. Sample method, we want to choose the type of samples. Let's say it will likely be a quarter core because we don't want to send the remaining half, and the best we can do is to split that half into 2 and take a quarter of that. The sample method is cut core because we use a saw to cut the samples. Now we want to add a QC duplicates to the end of the hole, and also we want to raise set per hole. What this option allows us to do is that if you have multiple holes that you want to define the intervals for, it will set up the QC policy uniquely for each hole, which is a very good practice. So if you don't mind, you can always make sure that you choose this reset to hole if you are defining intervals for multiple holes. Now we need to check this box to include the duplicates when we generate the intervals. We come to the blanks, and again we select the frequency. For blanks, let's say we want to go insertion rate of 2.5, so every 40th sample we insert a blank. Again, reset to the hole and then add to the end of the hole. And then if you have a blank that has a specific ID, you can include it in your library and then select it in this instance. I don't have a unique ID, so I select blank non-recorded. We have to make sure that again we include this blank QC policy in our sampling interval generation. So check that box, and then we get to standards. Again, frequency, and again want to do 5%. So insertion rate of 5% every 20th sample. Insert a standard. We reset to the end of the hole, And then here we can choose the different types of standards. Select whatever grade range that you want to use, and make sure that you have provided enough coverage for the key grade ranges in your deposit. Now we're all good to go, and we have to make sure once again that this is checked and that is checked. Now that we have done this, we have finished defining the QC policy and the sample intervals. Now, if you're working on a project, you're doing this on one particular sampling program, but what about the other guys who are working on the same project? Maybe they are logging at another site. You want them to use the same protocol. So what we need to do is to save this QC policy that we have defined and the sample intervals. But before we do that, there's one more thing we can do. Go into the options here and let's clear for now. It's possible for you to apply a grade coloring format so that when you scroll through your sample intervals, you can see color specific colors for your blanks, for your duplicates, and for your standards. And how you do this is to just come in here. You want to highlight the rows. So let's choose a light blue here, choose a green and an orange. And then let's check this box to apply the grade conditional format. Click OK, and then we're all set. At this point, what we need to do is to export the template for reuse. So we go export, and then going to come into CutSheet and give it a name, CutSheet demo drill core. That's fine for now. Save it. Now that we have saved this, we can now bring it back and reuse it for a different project. So let's close this for now. You can say yes. And then let's go back to the CutSheet application. Now we're pretending that we are at a different site and we have to use this same template that has been predefined. So go in here and then double click it to open it. Yes, we want to use that. Maximize it. You can see here there are no policies defined for the sampling and for the QC samples. The regular samples in the QC policy doesn't have any definition, but what we can do is to import the template we just created. So let's bring the template here, and then you can see when we go in here, everything is defined. We have our QC policies all set. Now we are ready to generate the intervals. Now we can apply prefix for our samples. Let's call it temp, and then it's going to start from 2001. We can change this at a later on. I'll show you how to do that. When you are planning these things, you make room for finalizing your sample intervals in QC policy, so no need to worry at all. Let's generate the intervals and see what they look like. So click on this and off you go. When it's done, it's going to tell us. Okay, we're all good to go. You can see the color formatting that we applied to the rows for the QC categories. Very well, nicely applied. Now you notice that we don't have sample IDs here. That's fine for now because we haven't generated any sample IDs. Even though we applied temporary sample ID here, it's not generated. It's still good to go. Now what we want to do is when we generate these types of data, this is a very important geological stage in our mineral exploration process. So we want to make sure that somebody who has got a senior geological operations experience, a QP, or a very experienced project geologist has looked at these intervals and decided that it's valid for us to send it to the samplers so that they can bag the samples and label them correctly. Now, in order for us to do that, we need to get access to this data, and we can do it outside of LogChief. So let's go into the Grid tab here and export this data. Let's choose a CSV format. We call it here demo CSV demo cut sheet, just that, and then hit save. Now, if you like, you can generate sample IDs for this particular dispatch of data, but you can also leave it, and I'll show you what you can do when you finalize your sample intervals. So we are here now, everything is nice. Let's minimize this, and then let's go and look at the data we just exported. These are sample intervals in QC. Now, the geologist has gone through all these intervals, very well done. And then the geologists realize, whilst they are going through the downhole data, that there is a mineralized zone around 60 meters right here. Let's say there. However, based on the default intervals that we set for our QC policies, we have a blank here, and the next blank prior to that, there's actually none to start with, and then the next one is way over there. Now, when you do this frequency insertion, the system doesn't know where some of your controls can be. So since we find out that there's a mineralized zone here, we want to actually put a blank next to this mineralized zone so that if there is any cross contamination, the blank material can pick it up. So what we can do then is to come in here and generate a blank sample. We can do it in one of two ways. Just copy this, copy, and paste like that. And then we want to change the intervals from 60 to 60. Now the system knows that a blank sample doesn't have to have an interval. So we're good to go. Blanks and standards do not have intervals. So it can have the same depth from and depth to. Now that we have done that, let's keep this interval in mind. It will show up later on. We can now go close, save, save, save. Finally, that's what it takes to save a CSV file. It's fun. Now let's come in here. Remember that we exported this data out of the system and we've made some fixes. So we need to clear this data. So what we need to do is we can clear all this data, yes, and then import the one we've just fixed. Bring this in and it's there. Now remember that initially we set up this sample interval with certain prefix. Now let's say we don't like this prefix. We know what our sample IDs should look like. So I'll do CTS for CutSheet, and then the samples will start from 7001. Now that we've done this, we can generate our sample IDs. So hit generate, and it tells you sample IDs have been created very nicely. Now we want to import this data to LogChief so that the samplers can now use it to go through the system of bagging the correct samples and the QC material. Before we push it and get the database screaming at us, we need to validate to make sure there are no data integrity violations in our sample interval generation and QC policy definitions. Let's hit validate, and we get this nice message: validation successful, ready to load data. Hooray! Now we click this button, load, and then it says the sample ID does not allow null values. Okay, let's go find out. It's probably a null value somewhere. Voila, here. So let's go copy this Let's actually go back here. This is a real life demo, which is good. So we can copy this for whatever reason. It didn't start labeling our samples from the top like that, right? Validation was good. If you want to do it again, it's fine. Let's validate again. It's all good to go. Let's load the samples. Hooray! Load samples successful. Now you can see the job we've just done. Isn't that great? You can see everything we did here. These are the original samples. These are the QC duplicate samples. These are the standards, the blanks and the CRMs. Our job is done. Now let's find out whether we really got our job done or not. You can say yes because we're closing. Let's go to LogChief, go into sampling, and here we go. So hold LMDD02. We have regular samples. We have downhole QC duplicate samples, and then we have standards. Same thing for hole 3, the 2 holes we brought into the system. You can see how everything has been nicely done. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for attending this very exciting webinar. Please feel free to send me any questions or raise your hands for any questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer them.